Hey everyone, today I wanted to make a video on MEDDICC. This is a qualification process you're going to see at some of the biggest tech companies in the world. And I think a huge important distinction to make up front is that this is a qualification tool as opposed to a way to structure a conversation. And I think some people very much muddy the water sometimes, whereas I've made a video about command of the message. I recommend you check it out after this video. That talks about how to structure an actual discovery call, a 30 to 60 minute conversation with a prospect, whereas the MEDDICC is a tool to use and further qualify a prospect to make sure you have things like metrics, make sure you've identified the right person, you know exactly how they decide if they're going to buy software. We'll get into it much further. But again, a lot of large tech companies use this standard because it gives management, it gives the C-suite a way to look in on a deal with this qualification framework in place and quickly understand the most relevant things about the deal that they need to know to further understand how qualified it is. And on the flip side, it also gives you a way when you're speaking with a prospect to make sure you hold them accountable to get the things that you really need to see, that they are one, even serious in the first place, two, they're actually a fit for what you do, and three, that if you do provide value through maybe a proof of concept or a test of their software, that they will buy and move forward because you've already identified that instead of just sending them a proposal and nicely asking them to sign. I know a lot of you have asked me about boot camps that I personally recommend. I have recently partnered with Course Careers, who offers a tech sales boot camp that is a complete college alternative. For those of you that may be watching, don't have a degree, and have thought about breaking into tech sales, they have tons of success stories, and they also have a free lesson you can watch. And I've also got a code where you could get $50 off if you do ultimately decide to enroll in Course Careers. We'll get into it in much greater depth, but MEDDICC stands for metrics, economic buyer, decision process, decision criteria, identify pain, champion, and also competition. And again, regardless of what these specifically mean, we're going to use this as a guide to get information out of a discovery call, but it's not going to be the framework where we go down in a call and say, what are the metrics for success? Who is your economic buyer? What is your decision process, right? But it's a way and kind of a guide where after a call, we can collect all the information, we can think through the conversation we had and map it out to all these different criteria. And again, even before the call, we've already planned some questions around all of these different topics so we can extract that information in a more organic way as opposed to just a checkbox of tell me about this, right? There's a couple major points on the metric side where we'll focus first that you want to get when you're talking to a customer. First, you really want to understand how your product is going to give them a tangible business outcome. And again, it's going to be specific to the technology that you sell, but are you saving them time? Does your technology displace an older, and as an example, a more expensive technology? Or maybe you cost more, but you improve the performance so much that it's worth and justified to pay 2, 3, 4 times that cost, right? But again, we can sit here and say that all day and shout from the mountaintop that Apple uses our product and doubled their speed or doubled their performance. But we're using that as a guide. We have those proof points we can bring in. But importantly, and most importantly, when we're talking to them directly, let's try and get in their world and really understand what metrics would make them successful. It's not enough to say, hey, we can improve your speed. Let's give you a trial and see how it works. When you're starting to have these conversations and have them quantify not only what success would mean to them, but really about their current environment now. And I'll give you a practical example from my own career. The company that I work at now sells a tool that helps you identify problems in your massive cloud deployment way faster. And so one of the things that we'll do, obviously we can sit back and say, hey, how long does it take someone to respond to an issue in your cloud deployment? And they can give us a number, but more specifically, we're diving in further. Okay, how many people have to jump on a call at any given time to solve that? How much time do you think you're wasting on a monthly basis due to all these issues, right? There's a line of questions you can go down further and further. But look, a customer can tell you like, yeah, if we had 15 minutes back per incident that we had, that would save us so much time and make life great. But don't sit there and just take that at the surface. Dive even further. Make sure they've really articulated in an ideal scenario numerous times within the last 3 to 6 months where that pain has been quantified and it's caused true pain. So you can solve that and go forward and understand that, hey, if we delivered you 3 times better performance, would it be fair to say that that equates to $100,000 more of your bottom line because you're saving time for your engineers or whatever that might be? But also again, and what we'll get to very shortly with the economic buyer, which is E, is are these metrics actually relevant and tied to a major business initiative? Can we, in the best case possible early on, it may be difficult early, but throughout the deal, we're going to try and quantify this further and further. Can we quantify how our solution gets actual dollars either added to their revenue or decreased in terms of labor costs, etc., whatever it might be? And also on the technical side, can we actually get a quantifiable result like improving performance, but not just saying, hey, we'll make your deployment run faster, but saying, hey, here's where it is now, help me define what that truly looks like. And then I believe, based on our conversation today, we could get your performance to, I don't know, 3 times faster, which would equate to this much time, and by extension, free up this much time from your engineering team. Would you agree with that metric and definition, right? And it's important to say that this is a conversation. This isn't us coming in and saying, hey, we're gonna make you better by 400%, take it or leave it, do you agree with that? Through the line of questioning, through the video I made on command of the message, we can have a conversation and ideally help them really help us understand their current state today, what that looks like, and get actual metrics around it. And then yes, we can tell them that we're going to do it 400% better, but ideally we're saying, hey, here's where you're at, based on what I've seen, I think we can get you to this, and then make them agree not only that 4x would be better, but also agree on the dollar amount. And what we're doing subconsciously is by having these metrics defined, when I have a developer who doesn't have the ultimate ability to sign off, he's got to go up to his VP of engineering, his CTO, even the CEO, and say, hey, this is why I think we should buy this tool. If we have very well-defined numbers, if we have very well-defined technical criteria, when we deliver on that in our proof of concept and test, now it's that much more compelling because the CEO knows and believes that developer who says, if we can achieve 4x this speed, that's going to save us $500,000 a year. Now we've set ourselves up to be in a very good position because we were very strict and required to get metrics up front throughout this deal. Now, the economic buyer is someone that typically has direct control and oversight on profit and loss. So they're overseeing an engineering department. Yes, they're concerned about the success of the technology, but they also want to do so in a way that optimizes that department's spend. Also, I think a very common misconception about the economic buyer is that it's someone that has budget to spend on software. And it could be the case that yes, they have budget, but I think an important distinction, and going back to metrics, is this is someone that also not only has budget or the ability to deploy capital within the business, but they can also reallocate discretionary funds when they find something that is worth buying and worth not spending on something else. And that is a little bit different and nuanced from just a budget. And the reason that I bring this up is a lot of times, especially in the tech world, you're going to speak with developers, with software engineers that say, yes, we have budget. Yes, we need a tool. Well, that's great. And yes, it's possible maybe if we can start as an entry point to have them ultimately buy. But a lot of people will put all of their eggs in that basket and not realize that that director, that manager, that senior software engineer has to go to a CTO who has very little oversight throughout the process. And because we didn't present them with meaningful metrics, because we did not engage that CTO or whoever the ultimate buyer is up front, we ultimately lost momentum and didn't have the leverage that we thought when it came time to actually get them to sign the approval. Now, piggybacking off of the economic buyer, we want to start to get into their decision criteria, both from a technical and a business perspective. To oversimplify, we could spend an entire day talking about decision criteria, how to get this out. We want to identify from the prospect why they want to buy anything and why they want to buy now. Because a lot of what people that are new to tech sales don't even think about is, yes, of course, we're competing against different vendors that are trying to sell to them in parallel, but we're also competing against them ultimately deciding to do nothing. There may be a situation, if we haven't defined the metrics, if we haven't gotten in front of both the economic buyer and also the people who define the technical success criteria, if we haven't really well defined what outcomes they have, yes, on the technical side, but equally and more importantly, that longer term business objective, then we don't really have any momentum or the leverage that we think we do, and we're very vulnerable late stage for budget cuts, for all of these different things to change at the drop of a dime that we don't have control over or any leverage against because we haven't started to define these metrics and get in front of the right people and understand that decision criteria of why they would buy anything and why they would buy now. Next, we want to focus on our decision process. And there's both the validation process and also approval process, and we need to get this early. A lot of times a huge mistake that reps make will be mistaking like a check-in phone call for 15 or 30 minutes as actual progress or a result when it's really just a continuation. And a lot of times a huge mistake that rookie salespeople make as well is giving access to time of our engineering team, giving access to full access to the product, etc., without actually understanding this process in the first place. And it can be difficult. There are going to be engineers that kick back and say, hey, listen, I'm just going to spin up a free trial. I don't need to do all of this, right? I don't need to tell you our decision process. It's too early. But you have to be very firm with them and make them understand that what we're doing by defining this up front is saving everyone else a ton of time down the line. Because from the perspective of the individual engineer, they may play around with a free trial and really like it, but we don't have any insight as to how they actually buy software. How do they validate that it's a real solution? How do they get approvals to actually use this on production systems, which will ultimately make their life easier? And if we don't do that right now, we're going to get 4 months of using this individual's time to test it, when ultimately they can't even buy it and now they just wasted all of that time, right? So it's very important early on to create a reverse timeline. If you have a great initial conversation, I would say maybe the second call, it's like, hey, we're about to potentially put a lot of time into investigating if this tool makes sense to use. What I want to understand is how it looks from signature and back so we can have all of those pieces in place and make sure it's worth everyone's time. I'm not here to say that like, we're just going to close the deal if you tell me that. But by understanding that, maybe it's worth getting legal involved earlier. Maybe it's worth getting the CTO in on the initial call to see if they agree with the metrics that we've provided them on the success criteria. And if they don't agree, then we stop. We don't waste anyone's time. We don't waste your time. We don't waste my time. But if you can tell me what this process looks like in greater depth up front, it's going to save all of us time. It's going to make this process a lot easier if this is a great fit. The next on this list is identified pain. And like I'd say with any of these points that I'm bringing up today, a lot of these are things that sales reps take at face value and don't probe into a level deeper to make sure that they're as serious as they seem. And especially in the case of identified pain, an individual developer may come to you and say, hey, this process really sucks and it's wasting a lot of my time. I know we can do better. The rookie salesperson takes that and is like, all right, great, that's exactly what we solve for. And instead, what identified pain is really probing into is what is the actual urgency around this issue? Is the problem bad enough that you're willing to either stop what you're doing immediately or certainly make it a priority in, say, the next 3 to 6 months, especially at these very, very large companies? Is it actually serious enough that you're willing to prioritize it, shift other priorities around to make sure this is resolved within that time frame? What are the negative consequences if we don't do anything? Like I mentioned, that individual developer may say like, hey, if we could double our speed, that would solve our problems, life would be great. Okay, what happens if we don't? Like, do you think you could genuinely get approval to pay 3 times what you're paying now? Or is your performance good enough to where management is like, hey, that's great, it would be cool to go faster, but at the same time, it works good enough right now. And that's another thing, again, so many reps, I myself, early on in my career, made the mistake of taking things at face value and not really understanding why they would actually make the move to the product that I was selling. Lastly, again, in an ideal world, especially early as possible, not only can we identify the urgency, not only can we identify the negative consequences if they don't do anything, but we can tie it, again, with these metrics to a positive business outcome. And maybe we don't get that right away on the first call, but maybe we ask to get the CTO involved on our next call, and we can better understand, yes, we can improve your speed 3x, but does that save your engineering team so much time that you can reduce your additional headcount next year by 1, which pays for the product already? Or if it performs 3 times faster, you will retain way more shoppers because literally tenths or hundredths of a second make a difference for people, as an example, on an online store. So if we can reduce that time, does that mean you'll retain 20% more of people on your website, right? These are all examples, but again, we really want to quantify with metrics a positive business outcome that is attached to this identified pain. The first C of MEDDICC is champion. The last one is competition. That is kind of so broad in terms of how you position against your competition that I'll leave that for you to determine on your own, so I will cut off here at champion. But again, I think there's a very important distinction to make of a champion versus an economic buyer. Oftentimes, the economic buyer may be the CTO who joins initially on our first scoping call to agree with the metrics we provide them, but they're not necessarily going to be on the day-to-day. They're not necessarily going to be actually testing and implementing our product directly. They just ultimately approve if it's worth sending that budget towards that tool set. And so it's very important to develop a champion that has power, influence, and credibility within the organization. And also, in an ideal world, we can identify a personal win. So as an example, maybe it's someone that has 5 years of experience that has worked their way up through the organization, but isn't maybe at, the CTO or VP of engineering level, but they really were brought in to spearhead this new environment. And if successful, it's very much implied, or maybe they've even outright said directly, if they're successful with this, they'll get huge kudos within the organization. They might even, at the end of that implementation, get a direct promotion to some type of role. It's going to depend on who you talk to. They're not necessarily going to say that exactly explicitly, but especially as you go to bigger and bigger organizations, you're not going to have the champion and the economic buyer always accessible. So this is the person you're interacting with most often, probably someone who's actually testing, actually implementing, and or overseeing this and delegating some of the work to maybe 3 to 5 engineers. But they're going to be the ones that not only are pushing this through to completion, but can sell for you internally. And again, because we've defined very good metrics, because we understand the decision criteria and process, because we've identified a very serious, urgent, and real pain that is much better than not doing anything at all, then we can leverage our champion to sell for us internally because they've got all of this well defined and articulated. And there's many different ways outside the scope of this video to make sure your champion is well educated enough on your product to sell internally. But I think it's, again, a very important distinction. This isn't the one that you want just saying all the time, like, hey, this product's so great, it's amazing. Like, yes, there's going to be elements of that, and obviously we want them to support the product, but this is someone who's going to be willing to go to bat for you and not just preach from the mountaintop and everyone and say, oh, this tool is so great, what do you guys think? It's the person who's saying, hey, this tool is great and here's why. And when a CTO says no, they're going to say, hey, listen, I hear where you're coming from, but I really want to lay out for you why this product is so much of a better improvement than where we're at today. So not the person that's just like, yeah, that looks great, that looks amazing. It's the person that's like, wow, this is really great. And I think if I can talk to our broader team, they'll immediately see how valuable this is. So let me see what I can do for you, right? And again, I'm getting too hypothetical even for my own liking, but I think you get the point. The only note that I'd say on competition, again, this is where so many reps go wrong, is a lot of times, yes, again, we're competing against different people, but like I mentioned earlier, we're competing against doing nothing. And if we haven't properly identified a champion, or maybe we're mistaking someone who's very excited about what we do and can tell us a lot about the organization, but doesn't actually have meaningful influence, doesn't have a personal win attached to this initiative, then when it comes to competition of do nothing, they may leave. They may also just not even be taken that seriously by the C-suite, by the VP of engineering. They haven't built out that relationship internally, and they're not a true champion that is actually going to be able to convince an organization to pick us over, as an example, doing nothing. So I just quickly want to reiterate again why we even use MEDDICC in the first place. At large organizations, especially 5, 10, 20,000 employees, having this standard framework gives a lot of visibility to not only your direct manager, but directors, VPs of sales, chief revenue officers, and CEOs, right? Especially for important deals, they can come in and really get a sense of how well qualified or not that this deal really is. And by extension, on an individual rep level, again, this framework is not something we're going into a call and saying, hey, can we get metrics around this? Who is your economic buyer? How do you decide to buy, right? Like, we package this in a much more structured way with a framework like command to the message, but this qualification framework gives us a way to get the information we need, and also because this is defined, we can also then go a level deeper and make sure we're not taking answers at face value. And the entire process along this way, I mentioned how reps will often just take things that they want to hear, and they'll be like, great, we can solve that problem, when do we sign, right? And obviously oversimplification, but if you're really pressing them for metrics, if you're really asking them, and not just saying, who's your economic buyer, but you're really identifying like, hey, if you find value in this, are you the one signing the proposal, right? And if not, let's bring in the team to save everyone's time. Same with decision process, decision criteria. If we don't have that up front, what's the point of just giving you access to this tool? Because you might use it for a month and it might work for you, but then when you have to put it in production, then when you have to get your chief technical officer to sign off on a $100,000 contract, you can't use it anymore, and you just spent a month of your own time doing something that is now like a complete waste of time. Additionally, I think a huge point, and again, on this identifying pain, a lot of times people will say, well, hey, if we could run 3 times faster, our life would be amazing. We wouldn't have any problems at all. Okay, what does that mean? Why is your current solution that bad? Like, have you had instances where you have lost the company money because of what you're doing today? And really identifying if the problem is urgent, if the problem is serious enough for them to buy something within a 6 and maybe at the extreme side 12-month time frame. If you don't have that information, you really have to question how serious it is and how much time and resources you actually want to put towards that deal. And same thing with champion competition. Again, a champion's a little bit different than the economic buyer, but this is the person that has a personal win attached to this project that we're doing. This is the person that's going to go to bat for us and not just say, hey, this tool is really cool. It's the person that's going to tell the CTO, hey, this is why we need to buy this. I can guarantee you if we perform with this tool at this metric that we will generate $500,000 more, as an example, right? It's the person that's not just preaching and saying, hey, this is really cool. It's the person that's willing to challenge people even within their own organization to say, hey, you don't understand how great the solution is for us, right? And lastly, on the competition piece, there's so many ways you could go into that, but I'd also say if you're new to sales, don't be naive to the fact that you're also up against them not doing anything and deciding to spend money elsewhere. So it's very important for you to really qualify out. Look, especially when you're early on, when you're first getting a taste of that commission, that sales-based job, it's so exciting to have variable pay. You want to close anything and everything, but you lose sight of the deals that aren't actually serious, and you spend half a day every other week with a customer that is just spinning your wheels and not going to go anywhere. So I hope that overview helped. Again, I did partner with Course Careers if you don't have a degree and you're looking into tech sales for the first time, so check out the comment that I've pinned at the top of this video. But if you do have any questions on this process, you do have any questions on tech sales, I'm happy to help and appreciate your time. We'll see you in our next video.